In his 13 plus years at the helm, John Schneider has been no stranger to making draft weekends trades. Will the Seahawks consider moving down from the number 5 overall pick to recoup extra picks? Dallas Cooper and I'll be breaking it all down in our latest installment of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for Blue Friday by my co-host Dallas Cooper. We're less than 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. We'll be talking some about some potential moves that John Schneider and company might make with the number 5 overall selection. And with free agency slowing down to a crawl, it's time for our annual post-free agency superlatives. We'll be dishing out some awards for the Seahawks during the free agent season. Jam-packed episode coming your way, so let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Over the past couple weeks, there's been a lot of speculation about the Seahawks potentially trading up from the number 5 selection with the Arizona Cardinals, their division rival, at number 3 overall, to maybe get a quarterback, Anthony Richardson being the one in particular that's been connected most to the Seahawks. But if we're looking from a historical perspective, Dallas, yes, John Schneider has traded up a handful of times in his first 13 drafts as the general manager of the Seahawks, but much more often he has been looking to add picks by trading down. And even though they've got a top 5 pick, it is still a possibility that that could be the route that they go here if certain dominoes fall in ways they don't want them to fall in those first 4 picks in front of them.
Everyone knows the Seahawks are looking for a premier defensive lineman. And Will Anderson is probably their top guy on their board. If he's not there, that's one way that this could honestly be even more likely a trade down scenario. Or something like the quarterback that they want isn't on the board, a guy like Anthony Richardson. Corbin, you have even proposed that it's likely that 3 quarterbacks go in the top 4 picks. If that happens and Will Anderson's off the board and Jalen Carter, because of the off-field situations, if John Schneider and Pete Carroll feel that he is off their draft board at this point, this could propel them to trade down. Tyree Wilson might not be the pick they feel is worth it at number 5. You have to remember, you can't reach. You have to think value. At the end of the day, yes, it's exciting having a top 5 pick, but if there isn't a player that you feel is worth at the number 5 spot, it's best to trade down and gain another day 2, potentially even a 2024 first round pick, and that could help you in the future.
Yeah, there's going to be some offers potentially on the table, especially you got to look at this 3 quarterbacks going in the first 4 picks from 2 different angles. From one perspective, that makes it likely that the QB that the Seahawks may actually have real interest in drafting, whether that's Richardson or somebody else that they've been smoke screening for, is probably going to be gone. And you're left with one of the top 4 quarterbacks on the board when the Seahawks are up. There are going to be other teams that are going to be looking at that situation thinking, I want to leapfrog so that I can get that QB. And it just depends how much they're going to be willing to give up. So that's the flip side. On one hand, we're probably not going to get the guy we want. Anthony Richardson's probably not going to be there at number 5. But there's still going to be a quarterback there, assuming that somebody else does not trade up with the Cardinals and make history, 4 quarterbacks going the first 4 picks. And that could very well happen when we get to the draft here in a few weeks. But Seattle could still be in a position where a team like, say, the Raiders, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some other teams later that may have interest moving up, but there may be a team that is looking at that 5 spot thinking, let's go get our quarterback now. Let's jump over other teams that might have interest in taking that player, and let's go get them. So that puts the Seahawks in an interesting position. But at the same time, we saw how bad this defense was last year. 31st against the run inconsistent rushing the passer. They've lost a bunch of veterans in the interior of their defensive line. They need reinforcements there. So you're hoping that you can get a blue chip player there rather than trading down and putting yourself in a position where you're in the next tier of players. And there's not a lot of depth at defensive tackle in terms of first round guys, at least. There's a big drop off after Jalen Carter. If he's still on your board, as you mentioned, that might not be the case. And then if Will Anderson's not there, if Arizona picks, I'd be stunned if they're not picking Will Anderson. I would expect that he's going to be the selection for the Cardinals if they're sitting pat there and they're not trading down. That does leave you with the predicament, is Tyree Wilson a top 5 talent? In my opinion, he is. But Seattle is actually in decent shape at the edge position right now with Nwosu, Taylor, Mafe. They're going to get Alton Robinson back. They like Tyreek Smith. So that might not be a position where they're necessarily thinking we need to use this high pick. Let's go see if we can get somebody else by trading down a few selections. Take advantage of how deep this class is in a number of positions with an extra day 2 pick, or like you said, getting a selection in the first round. This is where I stand, though. And it's interesting. I actually wrote an article about this on All Seahawks. You can look at it. It was posted today, ranking all 33 trades that John Schneider has made in the last 13 years. And I can tell you, it took as long as the article is to read. It took a long time for me to put that together, but it was revealing. The Seahawks have traded up 8 times. I think they have hit on every single one of those picks. If you want to argue for one that they didn't, I mean, maybe Cody Barton is a 3rd-round pick. He was only a starter for 1 year. Maybe you can make an argument, that wasn't a hit. But 3rd-round picks don't have a high success rate. And then Stone Forsythe is a 6th-rounder. You were expecting probably going to be a backup. And that's what he is. He's a really solid swing tackle. I think that's a decent pick, but they've had Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. They've had Jaron Reed, who's been a very solid NFL player. Michael Dixon was an all-pro as a rookie. I mean, most of the guys they've traded up for have been studs, but the trades they've traded down, we're talking 25 trades moving down. They've gotten 2 Pro Bowlers or all-pros from those selections. And so they've had a much lower success rate finding talent doing that. And so it's kind of that balancing act where I've thought for a long time, get as many lottery tickets as you can, but you got to wonder if you have an approach like John Schneider where you're trading down so often, it almost feels like you're burning some of your better lottery tickets when you do that.
You kind of want to do the lottery ticket. As you said, there's been such a kind of prominence around the league for teams to trade down and gain picks. And yet, as you said, oftentimes the success rate isn't as high because the blue chip talent isn't on the board at that point. However, for John Schneider, again, this is the rare opportunity that if you're going to trade down, you're now trading down from number 5. You're not inclined to have to trade all the way down to the teens, all the way down to the 20s. If you trade back only a couple of spots, potentially a blue chip talent might still be there on the board. And if you still get a day 2 pick, or even like a late first, that could potentially have Seattle have 5 picks in the first 52.
Yeah.
That would be a lot of lottery tickets, as you said. And that's a lot of stuff you can fill the roster with. The rookies that can come in, you don't have to draft with need at that point. You can strictly go best player available because you have so many picks. And that would make risks that you want to take a little easier. You have 4 other picks that you could potentially go to if you did trade down.
Yeah, we look at this draft. We've talked about the depth at edge, at corner, at some of the other positions, running back even. There is so much depth at a number of positions. There might not be a lot of elite superstar talent in this draft class, but there's a lot of really good football players. So if you can recoup an extra pick, I get that. But you also have to think in the back of your mind, if you move down from 5 to 8, 9, 10, 11, if you somehow get into the double digits and you're trading down, you might get more picks back in compensation for falling that far. But that could truly take you out of the running of getting a true difference-making star potential player. And there are players like that are in this draft class. The Seahawks are going to have an opportunity potentially to get 1 or 2 of those guys. So you want to take advantage of that. I think that this is truly one of those situations that you have to play out those first 4 picks, see where the quarterbacks, the defenders fall, who's on the board still that you're looking at. who knows whether Tyree Wilson is a guy that they view as a number 5 pick, but they're going to have to gauge what's going on in front of them, those first 4 picks. And this is a different situation for them. Like you mentioned, when you're trading down from 26 to 31, like they did before they picked Jermaine Ifedi years ago, like that's a different level of players that are available to you at that point than if you have a top 5 pick. And so you can look at it from positive and negatives here. There's certainly pros and cons to making this move, but I do think that the Seahawks, they maybe need to be a little less aggressive with the trade down stuff just simply to get picks and really focus on getting those best players to bolster their roster, because they position themselves that way in free agency where they don't have to necessarily try to fit in a puzzle piece just because they're looking at that position. Go get the best player that's going to make your football team better. And so John Schneider's got a lot of flexibility. I'm curious to see what happens. And this is a perfect segue, because if John Schneider is going to trade down, there are some teams that stand out as potential suitors that would want to move up to get that 5th overall pick. We're going to be discussing a few fan-submitted trade proposals, and Dallas and I will have a few proposals of our own on how John Schneider can add extra picks and potentially move down from number 5 overall when we get to the draft here in a couple weeks. That's coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Ultimate Football GM. If you listen to our podcast regularly, you know how much I love the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. I play it all the time. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, your dream can come true. This game is definitely for you. You can manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, lead your team to glory. You're responsible for everything from hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. All of this comes in a challenging and realistic game world. If you want to give John Schneider a run for his money running your own team, this is the way to go. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. It's a blast, and our listeners should join in on the fun in their own league. You can get a guys by using the promo code Locked On. That's in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. You can download the game visiting ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined on today's episode by my co-host, Dallas Cooper. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Montana or you're listening in Chicago. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We were just talking about the possibility of the Seattle Seahawks trading down from number 5 overall. John Schneider has made a ton of trades during draft weekend, so it wouldn't be a surprise at all if he fielded offers for that pick and ultimately auctioned it off. It depends what happens with the first 4 picks in front of them, which players are at the top of their draft board. We don't have intel that much on this show. We don't know what John Schneider's board looks like. We may have some inklings based on past drafts, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And assuming that the Seahawks decide to move down, as they've done plenty of other times, there should be some teams that have interest in moving up to that number 5 spot. Now, we pitched this, Dallas, online on social media to our listeners. And before you and I dish out some of our own proposals, let's check out a handful of trade proposals we got from our valued listeners on social media. The first one here coming from Julio Clears, and had a nice picture of Ohtani in a Mariners hat. The Mariners fans just dreaming as a Twitter profile picture here. The Chicago Bears getting pick number 5, moving back up after sliding down from 1 to number 9 in that trade with the Panthers. And the Seahawks get the number 9 pick, number 53, and a 2024 second-round selection, the one that was coming from the Panthers as part of that originally mentioned trade. That would certainly be an interesting one, Dallas, because Chicago, they are in that position where they just recouped all those picks, and there might be a certain defensive tackle that might still be there at number 5. If the Seahawks have him off their big board, Chicago might say, oh, come on down to the midway.
Chicago, Jalen Carter is probably their number 1 player. Without off the field stuff, he's probably their number 1 player on their board. And because of that, is they run a 4-3 defense. They really need a 3-tech defensive tackle. And as anybody who's watched or been a part of the draft process, Jalen Carter is that 3-technique defensive tackle. As for the Seahawks in this case, trading back to number 9 would still keep you in position to potentially maybe get a corner that falls, one of Devon Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, maybe even Tyree Wilson falls. At that point, it's kind of interesting because you're limited on the defensive players you can take. And maybe that will incline the Seahawks to even further trade down because there might not be even players they want available at the number 9 spot.
Yeah, this could be a chance for him to trade down a couple times. Although I will tell you again, historically speaking, that has not worked out well. Malik McDowell, Christian Michael, when they've made multiple trade downs, Paul Richardson's another example. It typically has not yielded the results. Marquise Blair was another one. I can keep naming it. This has not worked out for them. So they might want to stay where they're at and try to get a premium talent if they can get their hands on that player. The second one coming from Nathan Staley, the New York Jets. We know they like making trades with the Seattle Seahawks. Pick number 5 and pick number 151, a 5th rounder, going to the Jets in exchange for 13, 42, and 112. Now, this would be a little further down than I would want to trade down if I'm John Schneider, because as you talked about the last segment, you can trade down a few spots and you still might have a chance to get one of those top defensive players. If you trade down to number 13, you can kiss your chances of getting any of those guys goodbye. The only positive here is you're going to end up getting 2 extra picks. You get an extra selection in the 2nd round, and you only have to give up that 5th round pick to sweeten the pot where the pick is a little earlier. There, a little bit of pick swapping going on. So you would end up with extra picks, but at what cost? It depends which players you value and where your big board is sitting at. But this feels like this would be one that would be a little bit too far down for my liking to trade.
I agree. I think at the number 13 pick, you are extremely limited at that point. I think that limits you to, if you want to strictly go defensive players, limits you to guys like Kalijah Kancey, Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith. And these guys are good players, but I'm not sure that they're number 13 overall players. You don't really want to have to reach just because you want to get specific positions. At the number 13 pick, there might be some offensive linemen on the board, but again, does John Schneider want to use the 13th pick on an offensive lineman when potentially a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence might be able to fall to number 20, might be able to fall to the 2nd round potentially? So I think there's much better value that you can get if you stay put or you just trade back a little less.
Now, I just mentioned going down to 13 feels like a steep drop. I have to share this next one, though, because this one kind of intrigued me a little bit. It's 1 pick lower, and there has been a lot of murmurs out there. Bill Belichick is not happy with Mac Jones. There are rumors they're trying to shop him and that he's going to have to compete with Bailey Zappi to win that starting job next year. The Patriots might be one of those under-the-radar teams to watch try to move up. And what intrigued me about this, yes, you're moving down to number 14. And thank you to the submission from John 570564553. This trade would allow the Seahawks to get a future first. And I look at New England, the division that they are playing in right now. Buffalo is getting loaded. They've been one of the best teams in the AFC. The Jets are expected to get Aaron Rodgers with the talent they have on defense. The Miami Dolphins made the playoffs last year. This is not going to be an easy division for the New England Patriots to be able to compete. And so I like this deal better than that last one because I get that 1st round pick next year from the Patriots, and that could end up being a pretty high pick. Even with Bill Belichick as the coach, there's a chance that they could be one of the 10 worst teams in the NFL next year. And now you're in a position where you have 2 first rounders again, and one of them's in the top 10 again.
This puts you in premier position in the next draft. And we've all know the Geno Smith contract was 3 years, and yet there is an out after this next season.
Yeah.
And John Schneider, he has a decision to make this next coming year. If Geno Smith performs great again, it's going to be very tough to move off of him. And if you get that Patriots pick, you would have 2 first-round picks again, and then you would be sure that you have Geno Smith as your quarterback. Or if you really want to make a risky move, because you have that additional first-round pick, now you can package potentially 2 first-round picks, a 2nd-round pick, and some future assets in order to move up and maybe select a guy like Drake May, Caleb Williams in the top of the draft next year. That might put Seattle in prime position to get a top quarterback in the 2024 NFL draft.
Yeah, next year's class is supposed to be pretty darn good. And Caleb Williams, that's a special talent. Drake May, special talents. There's some good quarterbacks. So maybe that's in the back of John Schneider's mind here, too. I actually kind of like that deal from New England. I don't like trading down to 14, but if you're going to get a future first round pick as part of that deal, I think it's one that definitely makes sense. And the last one, real quick, this is a much more conventional trade. The Atlanta Falcons moving up to 5 and getting pick number 83, which is a third rounder. The Seahawks get pick 8 and they get pick number 44. Now, that's a big jump going from 83 to 44. And this was submitted by Chase Rydell, 41. This is a trade that would make sense. And he mentioned, I was wondering, why would the Falcons trade up? They are all in on Desmond Ridder, but then he mentioned they might want to move up to get one of those top cornerbacks to go across from A.J. Terrell, and you want to leapfrog the Detroit Lions, who are going to potentially be a team in the market for one of those top cornerbacks. And so it would make sense for them at a position where investing a top 5 pick has had pretty good success at corner the last 10 to 15 years, go up and get that player. So that is one that I think would make a lot of sense. Dallas, let's get to our own proposals here. And there's a team that's only a couple picks behind Seattle that they signed Jimmy Garoppolo, but the Raiders, they don't necessarily have their long-term quarterback on the roster now they've moved on from Derek Carr. And they are a team that has been a popular suitor to move up a couple spots and get that 5th pick, maybe for Will Levis.
Yes. The Raiders, to me, are in a prime position to move up in this draft. And yes, Corbin, they did sign Jimmy Garoppolo, and they could be looking for that long-term quarterback. But for the Josh McDaniels scheme, I don't think Will Levis really fits that. But the Raiders were also the 31st ranked pass defense in DVOA, excuse me. And as you said, the same reasons for the Falcons potentially moving up ahead of the Lions to select their top cornerback in the draft board, whether that's Devon Witherspoon, whether that's Christian Gonzalez. Potentially we could see something even wilder, something like Joey Porter Jr. But the Raiders need pass defense and they need cornerback play.
Yeah.
They haven't had good cornerback play for a couple of seasons now, and their pass defense has struggled. You have a premier pass rush talent in Max Crosby, and you need to maximize his talent on that defense. They just need guys to be able to cover long enough to let him get home. And a guy like I said, either Christian Gonzalez or Devon Witherspoon, both would be great assets for the Raiders to pick. And the Seahawks would stay in the top 10 and still be able to get a blue chip talent.
Yeah, if they ended up passing up on a quarterback and Will Levis was still there at number 7, that might create kind of an interesting discussion for John Schneider and Pete Carroll at that point. And maybe they trade down again. Who knows what happens? But this would be ideal because you're only moving down a couple spots and you can still end up getting another 2nd round pick out of that deal. You give up your 3rd rounder, but still you get 3 picks in the 2nd round. You got 2 first rounders and still have a top 10 pick. You can really feast on a deep, talented draft class. Now, for me, I'm going to go down a few picks to the defending NFC champions because, like the Seahawks, the Eagles have 2 first rounders. They acquired one from the New Orleans Saints and they have the number 10 pick. And the Eagles have traditionally been a team that's really aggressive moving up. Now, they're not going to be looking for a quarterback. Jalen Hurts is the answer there under center for them. But this is another team. They're getting older at corner. I could see them try to move up to get Christian Gonzalez or Devon Witherspoon. I could also see them being a team that's interested in Jalen Carter. And the big reason why that would make sense, they just drafted Jordan Davis, who was on the same college team, and Nakobe Dean as well. Those 2 guys were leaders in Georgia's locker room. You put them back with Jalen Carter, and it's a great opportunity to be able to get him in the right mindset so that he can play at his very best. I think that'd be very scary for the rest of the NFC, but if Seattle could get a 2nd or 3rd first rounder out of this at pick number 30 as part of this deal, and again, the structure of my trade, the Seahawks would be giving up their first 2nd round pick, but you're still going to get number 30 and you're going to get number 62. And this would be almost dead even when you're looking at the trade chart. So if the Eagles want Jalen Carter bad enough, you can swing this deal. Seattle still has a top 10 pick. They pick at 20 and they pick at 30, and you still have 2 selections in the 2nd round. You still have a chance to get a lot of really talented football players to add to your team. I know there's one other team that you're looking at outside the top 10 real quick that could make sense to trade down or trade up with the Seattle Seahawks.
Yes, team in the AFC South, the Tennessee Titans. Also a team that's not had good pass defense in terms of coverage, And again, same reasons as I've said for the Raiders, same reasons as I've said for the Falcons. They probably want to move up. In my trade proposal, they would want to move up for the top quarterback. They just signed Jeffrey Simmons to a 4-year deal extension, so they wouldn't really be on the board for really Jalen Carter. But the potential to have Jeffrey Simmons with elite cornerback play would be great for the Tennessee Titans. And as for the Seattle Seahawks, again, you're bolstering your top 50 or so picks. You would have 5 at this point. And then additionally, you would be a pick swap from 83 to 72. And that's just another additional value. Gives you a higher chance to maybe you get guys that fall, guys like maybe Keanu Benton if he falls to the 3rd round. You never have a chance. That there's a good depth in this class, and you always want to get as much as you can, especially in the top 100.
Yeah, that pick swapping stuff is a big deal when we're talking about trying to even out these deals. And John Schneider historically has been pretty good at that. He and his staff do a good job of trying to even out value and really maximize what they're getting in return. Real quick, I'm staying in the same division. The Texans actually have the number 2 pick, but I could see them wanting to move up and get a second pick in the top 5 because if you've watched the Texans play, they have a ton of holes. They could use help in a number of different positions, and that is a team that I could see Jalen Carter being interesting to them at number 5. You pick somebody like, say, Bryce Young or CJ Stroud at number 2 to get your quarterback. They might even want to trade up here to get one of the top offensive linemen because there could be a run at that point too. So the Texans have a lot of options. And in this case, the Seahawks, even though they're moving down 7, you're getting basically another first-round pick. Number 33 overall, you're only 2 picks behind out of the first round. You get a chance to get another marquee player with that selection. So I don't know that would happen, and that would be about as far as I'd be willing to trade down, unless you're like the Patriots and you offer me another first-round pick, like in that one proposal, then I'd be on board with that. But I could see those 2 teams in the AFC South potentially being interested. And if the Texans somehow don't pick a quarterback at number 2, I don't think that's going to happen, but this is the Texans that we're talking about here. So if they don't take a quarterback, they then would want to move back up to number 5 to get their QB. And that would certainly change things. I could see them offering up a lot more compensation than that to move up from number 12. If it played out that way, I would not anticipate that that's what's. So the draft agency. Free agency has slowed down to a lull here the last couple of weeks. Most of the action usually happens the first 5 or 6 days, and then everything slows down. We're getting closer to the draft. Teams have shifted their focus. So it's time for our post-free agency superlatives. Dallas and I are going to be dishing those out in 6 different categories coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download a FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored and 3-pointers drained. I'm a huge fan of player prop parlays, and you can make bets such as D'Angelo Russell of the Lakers scoring 20 or more points at plus 185. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's episode by my co-host, Dallas Cooper. Special thanks to all the 12s out there, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just to make sure that our listeners know, you need to check out our new NFL Draft newsletter here on Locked On. Luke Inman's doing a remarkable job putting that together. Make sure to check out that free resource at lockedonpodcast.com/newsletters to sign up for your free NFL Draft newsletter. All right, Dallas, let's talk some free agency here. Now, the Seahawks basically are in debt, so they're not going to be signing any more players right now. But they've made 6 outside free agent signings. They re-signed a number of their own players. And now that we're gearing up for the draft, it's time for our annual post-free agency superlatives. We've got 6 different categories that we're going to be discussing. And you and I are going to make our selections and maybe discuss and debate a little bit why we made our selections. And so let's get to it. Our first category here for our post-free agency superlatives. Who, in your opinion, was the Seahawks' best value signing, whether that's their own free agency re-signed or an outside free agent signing? Who is the best value signing for the Seahawks this free agency period?
This was a very tough choice as John Schneider, in terms of value, kind of knocked it out the park on a lot of these deals. But for me, I'm going to have to go with the basics. Geno Smith had to be the best value signing. The Seahawks got their quarterback and they believe in him. Yet this was an extremely team-friendly deal. Extremely team-friendly deal. Cap hit of just north of $10 million for the first season. The way that this contract is structured out is literally the best possible situation the Seahawks could have asked for. Before free agency started, people were thinking Geno Smith was looking for a contract north of $35 million. And that John Schneider would be forced to pay that if he wanted to keep his services. Yet, Geno Smith and John Schneider knocked it out of the park with the deal and ended up getting extremely team-friendly, allowing them to build around the team and make other great value signings.
Yeah, I think the other thing about Geno's contract that really was interesting is the fact that a good chunk of it was escalators. It was performance-based, and he was betting on himself. That helped the Seahawks, and obviously if he earns that money, then they're in great shape at quarterback. They might not have to make any other moves there. Maybe this is your long-term starter, but they want to see him do it again. And so I strongly consider that one because it is such a team-friendly deal. But I got to go with Bobby Wagner's contract. Now, there have been some reports out there from Richard Sherman on the radio the other day that John Schneider was lowballing Bobby Wagner. I don't know that he was lowballing it. That's just the way that the market was set up. Because you see guys like Levante David, he got a 1-year, $7 million contract with the Buccaneers. There were some really good linebackers that are 6-7 years younger than Bobby Wagner that weren't getting near as much money in free agency as I think many of us expected they were going to. The market, for the most part, was suppressed. And so to get Bobby Wagner, and I know he is not, maybe I'm wrong saying this because he's still a very good player, but he's not in the prime of his career. This is not 27, 28-year-old Bobby Wagner. You're getting him on a 1-year contract, $7 million. It's up to $7 million. The cap hit is lower than that. So you protect yourself a little bit there. He gets to come back to Seattle and hopefully finish his career where it started. It's a great situation for everybody, and yet it's still not a big cap hit for a guy that was a second-team All-Pro last year, a justified second-team All-Pro. Played remarkably well for the Rams, despite the fact that they flatlined last year and only won 5 games. So that, to me, is the best value signing. Now, let's go to the most underrated signing for the Seahawks, Dallas. And, maybe you could look at this similar to the previous one, but this is one that's going under the radar. We know Geno Smith and Bobby Wagner, those contracts are not going under the radar. But what is one that jumps out to you that isn't getting enough love?
Phil Haynes. Phil Haynes, whenever called upon, was always productive. This past season, oftentimes split snaps with Gabe Jackson. And what this did was really kind of put him in a rut. It was tough. You're really asking him to go in and out the lineup and expecting consistency when his role was anything but that. And yet, in 3 games, the Seahawks averaged 117 yards per carry. And Phil Haynes provides good run blocking. That's what they need in the middle of the offensive line. And what Carroll described him as is a physical and consistent blocker. And that's exactly what they're looking for. And to get him for a 1-year, $4 million deal, people, I think, were thinking that the Seahawks are going to be drafting early for guard. However, I think Phil Haynes really could be in their plans, and I think they do see some long-term future with him.
He's just got to stay healthy. That's been the biggest issue for him. But there's no question they were effective last year. 117 yards rushing per game. The starts that he had, they were 3-0 in those starts. For me, it's one of the newcomers, though, that's going to be playing next to Phil Haynes, and that's Evan Brown. And I talked a lot about Evan Brown before free agency started. This was one of my top center targets in this free agent class because the game tape in 2021 when he was stepping in for Frank Ragnow was fantastic. and he only gave up 1 sack. And then the one start he had last year at center going against Washington, who's got a really good defensive line, he was unblemished, didn't give up any pressures. And so to get him on a 1-year deal at just $2.25 million, this is a prove-it deal, but this is still just a 26-year-old center that I think has a chance to be a long-term starter. That's not saying that I don't think Seattle should draft a guy if the right player is there. I'm not saying that, but I like Evan Brown. I think he's a big upgrade overall from what they had in Austin Blythe. And at that price, at $2.25 million, that's a really affordable contract for a guy that I think could be a really solid starter at the pivot position for you. Now let's talk boomer bust, the free agent that has a chance to shine, but also could end up being a bust, could be one of their worst signings. Which player jumps out to you in that regard, Dallas, as somebody that might have a big season and might end up flopping and look like one of their worst signings?
Jaron Reed coming back to Seattle from the Packers. And yes, this is going to shock Seattle fans, but watch the tape from last year. He ran hot and cold. Oftentimes, it looked like he was checked out, uninterested. And there was a lot of rumblings going on in the Green Bay locker room. And as we've all known since the offseason, it was a tough situation to probably be a part of that locker room. So Seattle's making this deal, hoping that he can bring him back and he's going to be productive. However, the money attached to this deal is a little on the higher side for a player like him at this point. And Seattle, I'm wondering if this is more of a culture signing as well. Bringing back Bobby Wagner, bringing back Jaron Reed, potentially does fill you in to take a risk on a guy like Jalen Carter, because you have guys to take him under his wing. And that's exactly what he probably needs, players to be able to help him mature in this league.
Yeah, I think the culture thing is definitely a big part of bringing both those players back. For me, I got to put Devin Bush on here because you watch the rookie tape before he had the torn ACL. He was a top 10 pick. The Steelers traded up for him. His rookie tape is fantastic. He looked like a top 10 pick. Then he has the ACL injury, and he just has not been the same player. You get the sense from talking to people that were in Pittsburgh covering the team, though, that he had checked out, that he felt like he wasn't wanted there anymore, and it was impacting his performance. And so I'm curious, how much does being around Bobby Wagner impact him? Because he's a very talented player if he's healthy, and a change of scenery, this might be one of those cases. It doesn't always work out, but there are instances where a guy changes scenery and then the light switch comes back on. I could see it happening for this kid. I could also see him really struggling and not being on the field when Jordan Brooks comes back. And then basically you spent $3.5 million on a guy that was a reserve and just played special teams for the most part. And so there is a lot of boomer bust to that one. As far as the biggest free agent loss, Dallas, real quick, which player that Seattle lost in this cycle do you think is the biggest loss and why?
I'd say their biggest free agent loss would have to be Rashad Penny. And I'm going strictly off of talent because you have Kenneth Walker, and yes, he is ready to take the reins. Excuse me, at least he looks like he's ready to take the reins. But Rashad Penny was an explosive back in this league when healthy. And yes, that's the question. It's always been durability with Rashad Penny. But again, number 1 in the NFL in yards after contact, number 2 in the NFL in yards when not touched, number 2 in the NFL in explosive run rate. Rashad Penny is an elite back in this league when healthy.
Yeah, they could have brought him back at the right price, and Philadelphia didn't spend a lot of money. From what I've gathered, he just is ready to move on. He was nothing against Seattle, but just so much misfortune. I think he wanted to see if that change of scenery could help him. And so for that reason, he's not on my list for this, but I've got a guy that just signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's Ryan Neal for me, and I'm just going to be simple and to the point. This guy's just a great football player, and his ability to step in and play at an all-pro level last year when Jamal Adams got hurt, you've still got question marks. Is Jamal Adams going to be the Jamal Adams of old, coming off this torn quad tendon? And he's had other injuries. Not having Ryan Neal around. I love Julian Love. I think he's going to be a really nice addition. But Ryan Neal just brought something different to this defense, and just the attitude, the mentality, the way that he grinded to make this work, to be on an NFL roster after getting cut a bunch of times. And so I do think that it's a significant loss. I understand why Seattle made the decision they did. So I'm not going to say this is one that they're going to regret, because I think they had to make this choice. You had so much money put into the safety position. But still, I think he is a really good football player that just went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for half what he was going to make in Seattle for that opportunity to start. What was the most regrettable move in your opinion? One that John Schneider and Pete Carroll might look back on like, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Getting rid of Al Woods. That has to be the number one regrettable move at this point. Look at the depth chart. Name a 0 or 1 technique on the roster right now, besides potentially Jaron Reed. There's no one really else you can rely upon. And there's no one else really even with the body type to fit that position. Al Woods was as consistent as you could ask for at the nose tackle position. Teams could not run up the middle when he was in the game. He was consistently forklifting centers. You would see centers' shoulder pads go up, and boom, you knew the run was dead. The center wasn't moving. Al Woods wasn't moving. 2-yard run, and it was good. But when Al Woods was off the field in the games that we saw, Seattle fans did see it was a struggle. And Al Woods not being on the team, it's not looking too bright, but hopefully through the draft they can fix this.
Yeah, for me, it's got to be overpaying Nick Bellore, and that's not taking a shot at Nick Bellore. I think he's a really good special teams player. I like that they re-signed him, but 2 years over $6 million, it feels like that is money, especially knowing the salary cap situation right now. It feels like money that could have been better served invested in another position, or better served keeping somebody like an Al Woods on the roster when you only saved yourself a couple million by cutting him to begin with. And so I had a tough time with that one, not because I don't like the player and I think he has value. I think that he was overpaid on that contract for 2 years. And I understand paying the guy for what he's done, but you have to pay players based on what you expect they're going to do. And he's getting to be an older player. And so that would be the one that would be the most regrettable in my opinion. Real fast, and I'm not going to have a ton of time for us to explain, but what's the one move that has not yet happened, the best move that is yet to come for the Seahawks?
Get any of their veteran defensive linemen back. Shelby Harris, Puna Ford, or Al Woods, any of them, and I will be happy.
Yeah, for me, it's real simple. I think that they're going to have to deal a tight end. I think that it probably is going to be Noah Fant because we're talking about the salary cap situation. You'd save almost $7 million moving him, and maybe that's only for a first round. But this is a end. Who knows if that's actually going to happen, but that does feel like a logical move that they could turn to, add a late-round pick, open up cap space when you need it. And so that's the move that I anticipate maybe has a chance to happen here in the next few weeks. Maybe it happens on draft weekend for the Seahawks. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Dallas at Dallas C. Cooper. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and other major platforms for free to make sure you don't miss an episode. When we come back on Monday, Rob Rang and I are going to be doing a live mock draft. So yes, the draft guru himself and I will be doing a live mock draft with 2 weeks until the festivities kick off in Kansas City. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks for listening. Go Hawks.